Another way to say this is that a healthy relationship is one in which both partners are committed to serving the relationship more than they are committed to serving themselves. The first skill that you need is humility.
Now this, believe it or not, is somewhat of a controversial opinion these days, because suggesting to a woman in her 30s, like the case that you're giving.
3 pillars of effective communication with a partner. The first one is
modern dating, human psychology and attachment, and practical advice on how to seek and find a healthy, secure, romantic relationship. Now, a lot has changed in the dating world in the past 10 plus years with the invention of social media, dating apps. I would argue that not much has changed with regards to the foundation of human psychology and relationships. Now, today we have a speaker who's an expert psychotherapist who has a particular niche in relationships that can help us reconcile these differences of this fast-changing world and give some practical advice. Now, my guest today, Mr. Kevin Nahai, skilled psychotherapist, bachelor's and master's from USC, an author, a speaker, a guest on a host of podcasts. We're very excited to have you here today. Kevin, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mike. I look up to you a lot. You are, in my eyes, a world-class board-certified psychiatrist. I've sent patients to you, clients of mine, and I'm really grateful to be here today. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but you hit the nail on the head when you said that so much has changed in our modern dating world, but not so much has changed when it comes to evolutionary psychology and the way that humans function. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but I think this episode is going to be particularly helpful for 2 types of people. One is a person who is seeking a relationship and they haven't been able to find the right match. And the other is a person who is in a relationship but experiencing a lot of conflict and having difficulty working it out. Now, even if you're in a great relationship, I think this episode is for you because it will teach you how to maintain that great relationship. So much of those first 2 factors, not being able to find a healthy, sustainable relationship or experiencing a lot of conflict in your relationship, is the result of not understanding the underpinnings of human psychology and attachment theory and the way that human beings function. So I was supposed to introduce myself, but instead I'm just introducing the topic a little more.
Yes, of course.
But yeah, everything you said, I'm a therapist, I'm a life coach. I focus a lot on dating and relationships, and I have a private practice in Beverly Hills. So anybody wants to contact me, we can.
And we're going to have you let people know how to get a hold of you at the end of the show. Now, I suppose it would be helpful to start by defining what is a healthy, secure relationship. Are there universal truths to what that is? Is it totally dependent on the couple? What is a healthy, secure, romantic relationship?
Great question. So certain things are unique to certain individuals. When it comes to preferences of how people like to do things. However, what defines and underlies a healthy, lasting, sustainable relationship is not variable. It's based on certain foundational principles. And the way that I would define it, if I had to put it as concisely as possible, is that a healthy relationship is one in which 2 people know how to communicate in an effective way, and I'll define what that is, and are more concerned with meeting the other person's needs than with getting their own needs met. Now, a lot of people will hear this and they will say, well, what do you mean? It needs to be reciprocal. I spent so many years trying to meet the other person's needs. I gave so much, and look where it got me. It got me diddly squat. But if you think about this equation, if you have two people who A, know how to listen and communicate effectively, and B, are more concerned with how to give and how to serve than how to take, then the equation works itself out naturally. So if you and I are in a relationship and we have a pot, we have a bowl between us, and every day my goal is to put $10 into the pot instead of taking $10 out of it. And every day your goal is to put $10 in the pot and only take $5 out of it instead of taking 10 or 15 or 20. Then the amount of giving that we are both doing means that we both get our needs met.
And that's very important. So the two foundational principles you're talking about right now are good communication and also being mindful of the other person's needs and contributing to the relationship and the other person, because it seems like there's like three entities here, right? There's one, there's the both individuals, but there's also the relationship. So being focused on giving and having good communication, which I'm sure we're going to talk all about, are the two foundations for having a healthy relationship.
Absolutely. Another way to say this is that a healthy relationship is one in which both partners are committed to serving the relationship more than they are committed to serving themselves, right? And the interesting thing about this is you don't hear me saying that a healthy relationship is one in which two people don't have a history of trauma, or they grew up in a certain household, or they don't have certain problematic behaviors. You know, obviously, if somebody's lying, cheating, drug abuse, whatever, then it's not going to be a healthy relationship. That's a non-starter. But the point is that it's not so much about what a person has been through that determines whether or not they can be in a healthy relationship. Whether or not people can be in a healthy relationship is determined by the extent to which they can learn these two skills. One being how to communicate properly, and the other being having the humility to serve the relationship and serve the other person, and then finding their partner, finding their counterpart who also has those two skills, or they teach each other. They learn and grow together, right? We have a very one-dimensional view of who is capable of having a healthy relationship and who is not, based on their trauma, based on their upbringing, based on their parental figures, based on their relationship history. If we look at people through that lens, then they're essentially unhealable, or we're essentially resigning them to a lifetime of being alone because they've had too many problems that now preclude them from having a secure relationship. But if we look at people through the lens that you can learn 2, 3, 4 teachable skills, and then you can find somebody who's also willing to learn those skills, now we have an equation, now we have endless possibility for you to redeem whatever you've been through or whatever mistakes you've made in the past and actually have a healthy relationship.
Okay, so that's super important. Now, what you're proposing is that just because you have some sort of history in which you may not have learned these skills, which I would love some practical advice as far as how to build these skills, that you do not have to concede to the fact that I am unable to get into a reciprocal, healthy, secure relationship. There are ways that you can improve, and I'd love to hear some suggestions you have how to improve your own skills, communication and otherwise, to allow yourself the ability to enter, and foster and build a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Now, I suppose on that, what advice do you have as far as like communication? Let's dive there. You said there's like some advice that you have as far as like building these skills.
Okay. So first of all, just in response to what you said, there's an idea that two people are supposed to be whole or complete or self-sufficient on their own in order to be in a healthy relationship. That you have two people who have done lots of work on themselves. They've learned how to be happy on their own. They've learned how to stand emotionally on their own 2 feet. And that is a prerequisite to being in a healthy relationship.
Yes.
That's an enormous myth.
And that can be a very damaging myth. Hey, doc, I need to have it all together. I need to be self-actualized. I have to be in perfect mental health, or I'm not necessarily ready to seek and enter a romantic relationship. I need to be perfect.
100%. So
that's a big time myth. So everybody listen, because that's a myth.
It's a big time myth, and we'll dive into it.
Yeah.
But just to bring things full circle, the first myth that I was referring to is essentially that you are too messed up to be in a healthy relationship, right?
Yeah.
Which is you have too much history, too much trauma, whatever it may be, right? The second myth, or essentially that it's about the person and what you've been through, not about your relational capability.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it's not about the person or what you've been through. It's about your relational capability, which is teachable. The second myth is that you need to have all of the skills down before you get into the relationship. Because you're asking me for some practical skills, and I just want to advance the caveat here that you don't need to have all of these skills down. You just need to be willing to learn them. Okay?
Yeah.
So having said all of that, the first skill that you need is humility. And really what that means is being able to put your ego aside. When you are in a relationship, you can either be right or you can be at peace. But you cannot be both. The extent to which you are willing to be humble and listen and forfeit the right to have the upper hand in service of the relationship is the extent to which your relationship will be successful and your communication will be successful.
Okay, so let me pick you up on that. So humility, putting your ego aside now and being humble. Now, to me, humility means, like you were saying, understanding that just because you feel like you are right, that you don't know everything, there's value in what the other person has to say, just because you initially feel like you know better, that you take the time to listen to the other person's opinion. Humility, putting your ego aside.
Putting your ego aside, putting your defenses aside, and not advancing why you think your point is correct. One thing that people get wrong when it comes to effective communication is they think that if they can explain why they feel the way they feel, and if they can explain why the other person's feelings are not logical or are not fair in this situation, then the other person will concede and will be able to get along. And that could not be further from the truth. The truth is that the truth is not relevant. And what I mean by that is if you and I are in an argument, I have my truth, you have your truth, and then there is the, let's say, universal or objective truth, somewhere in the middle, most likely, right? What the truth is doesn't matter. What matters is that I have the humility to respect the way that you feel.
Bingo, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And if I can do that, if I can truly put aside what I believe is correct, right, true, fair, sound, if I can get rid of the part of my brain that needs to be correct and instead just understand that my friend, my colleague, my mother, my wife, they feel a certain way, and I can have respect for that feeling, right? Which this isn't easy, but it's simple. It's simple but not easy, right? It just requires a lot of humility. Now you and I can get on the same page. And by the way, this isn't just relational psychology. This will make you an absolute genius in the workplace. It will make all of your familial relationships be smoother, right? So the first principle of putting your ego aside,
Yes.
it makes you a relationship CIA spy because it allows you to take your perception of what you think is correct and instead swap it out for a perspective of how the other person feels.
Yeah. Now, this is so important. It's not necessarily this universal truth that matters when you're relating to somebody else. This is not a court case that you're trying to win with facts being adjudicated by some judge.
Exactly.
You are relating to another person, and what is paramount is understanding how they're feeling, mentalizing, trying to occupy their point of view, and not disregarding their feelings in service of what you believe to be the truth. Because when you're relating to another person, what matters is their feelings, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about you, how they feel about the relationship. So making sure that we prioritize and respect our partner or whoever we're relating to, their feelings. Now, one thing that I've seen in couples, now I don't do a ton of couples work, but when you see arguments back and forth being adjudicated like it is a court case in which the feelings don't matter, it's all about like the objective
Like a
facts
debate.
and truth, like a debate. Now we need to kind of shift that frame back. How are you feeling? What are the feelings associated here? I completely agree with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's bringing the focus back to what does the other person feel? And I don't mean to sound so like therapy-esque, like, oh, okay, how do you feel about this? But in this case, it really is about understanding the other person's perspective and emotions, even if you think that they're completely whack, right? Even if that's what you think. The question you asked me, Mike, was how do we have effective communication? Okay. Effective communication means strategic communication, which means that we are trying to get past a conflict. So the first principle is humility. I'll give you two others.
Please.
3 pillars of effective communication with a partner. The first one is you need to humble yourself and put your ego aside. Okay. The second one is a piggyback off of the first one, but it's its own distinct category, which is you need to take personal responsibility. Whatever the conflict is, whether you're in a relationship, whether you're going through a breakup, whether you're dating and you're trying to find the right person and that's become difficult, right? You cannot communicate with someone effectively unless you are willing to take accountability for how you are contributing to whatever issue is manifesting in front of you. So I'll give you a single example and I'll give you a taken example.
Please.
The taken example is you and your wife are in an argument. She feels a certain way, you feel a certain way, and you think that the way that she feels is ridiculous. Okay, first step is to put your ego aside and say, maybe what she feels is not ridiculous. Okay. Second step, the personal responsibility step, is for you to go into the other room for 5 minutes and ask yourself, what did I do to engender this situation? Right? If you cannot do that, you can't apologize and you can't rebuild. So therapists often talk about in a relationship the cycle of damage and repair. Damage and repair. It's not the issue that's present in the relationship. It's the couple's ability to repair from it and then become more resilient as a result. But that repair process is a product of how much personal responsibility you're both willing to take. And in that example, you would come back to your wife and you would say, I understand that I should have come at you a different way. or I understand that you didn't like the way that I said something, or I should have stood up for you in that setting, or, whatever. If you can't take any responsibility, then it's not going to go anywhere.
My partner's feelings are valid. Let me not disregard them just because I feel like they're silly or I feel like I'm right.
That's the humility place.
Taking a moment and considering, how did I contribute to this feeling arising, this situation arising?
100%. Now, for the singles out there, the personal responsibility piece is also very, very important. It is not your fault that you haven't found the right person yet. You're not unworthy. You're not unlovable. You're just undiscovered. But it is your responsibility that you haven't found the right person yet.
Yes.
As in, God is not going to drop the right person, Prince or Princess Charming, on your doorstep, even though you may deserve it, or you're the best person in the world, or you've gone on 100 dates and it hasn't worked out, right? You have to look within, go to therapy, go to coaching, read books, whatever it may be, and understand, what is my responsibility in being in this position that I don't want to be in? So you should never ask someone this question because it's a stupid question, but unfortunately it's very popular in the cultural lexicon. Why are you single? Oh, you're so handsome, you're so intelligent, or you're so beautiful, you have such a great career, you're so eligible. Like, why is she still single, right? Never ask somebody that. But when I was single and people used to ask me when I was single, if it was at a party or in the wrong setting or whatever, I would just say something cheeky. But because I was really trying to take responsibility, in my own mind, I knew exactly why I was single. And if pressed, I would have been able to answer that question. And the answer is not God's timing. The answer is not, oh, I haven't found the right person yet. The answer is not, oh, women in LA are so materialistic, blah, blah, blah. Like, all of that stuff is nonsense, right? There is a reason that I haven't found the right person yet. And some of that has nothing to do with me, but a lot of it does. And that doesn't mean that it's my fault. It doesn't mean that I'm a blameworthy person, right? But if I can't take responsibility for why I'm in this situation, or if I don't even have the self-awareness of why I hadn't found the right person at that time, how am I supposed to get better?
Exactly. Now, self-responsibility, people that have watched my prior videos, is one of the main pillars of having healthy self-esteem. Now, you are responsible for your life. You're responsible for understanding what your goals are. You're responsible for putting yourself in a position to succeed. Now, with dating, it's not all just under individual control. You can do your best and understand that it's your responsibility to do your best in order to accomplish the goal of finding a mate, but there are factors out of your control. So I agree with you. It's not your fault. That being said, you do need to take self-responsibility and put yourself in a position to succeed.
100%.
Now, and if you don't take that self-responsibility and you just expect for things to happen to you and good things to fall in your lap, then perhaps it might be your fault.
Right. And how you take that self-responsibility, I think a lot of people think like, okay, that means I need to get out there. I need to go to these events. I need to go to these parties. I need to get on dating apps.
Yeah.
Sure, that's some of it, but it goes a lot deeper than that. Personal responsibility is really about understanding why you operate the way you do.
Yeah.
And then why you're getting certain results as a consequence.
So let's dive in here. So a lot of people, there's people watching that are single, that are currently looking for a mate. There's also people that are watching that are they're in a relationship and want to make sure that they foster that relationship and make sure that it's healthy. If we could talk to the people that are currently single and they're wondering, how do I take full responsibility and put myself in the position to succeed in finding a secure, healthy, romantic relationship, what would you tell these people? Like, how do you guide them to maximize their chances to fulfill their potential to find a suitable mate?
Okay. So first, I'm just going to finish the previous point.
Please.
I talk a little too much and then we get on tangents.
You're good.
But the third pillar of that effective communication is effective conflict management. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to say, in case anyone was wondering, 3 pillars of effective communication. First is humility. Second is taking personal responsibility. Third is learning how to handle a conflict, what to do and what not to do amidst a conflict. And how to regulate your emotions during the conflict so that you don't say things you can't take back. I just did a podcast on this. I just did an episode where I boiled it down to 8 rules. There are 8 rules of how to manage a conflict effectively. And this is not only with your partner, but it's also with any person, a friend, a boss, a coworker with whom you have a close interpersonal relationship, right?
Managing conflict, yeah.
Exactly. So some of them are basic. Never say anything that you cannot take back. Don't be accusatory. Don't dig up the past and use it as ammunition against the other person.
Important one.
But some of them are a little bit more nuanced, and you'd be surprised how quickly they get overlooked. For example, the point of this debate is not for us to come to a compromise. The point of this debate is for us to come to a mutually agreeable resolution for both of us. And we have to sit here and talk about it until we get to that point. Because what most people do when they get into a conflict is they have a blowout fight and then they say, you know what, I don't want to deal with this. They go to bed, they wake up the next morning and they, for the sake of convenience, just pretend like the whole thing never happened, which means it gets swept under the rug and then it festers.
Yes.
And then that has a negative effect on the next time you are trying to communicate with your partner. So when it comes to conflict management, communication operates on a use it or lose it principle. So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Basically, the more you communicate effectively, the better your communication gets over time and the fewer conflicts you have over time. The less effectively you communicate, the harder it becomes to communicate with your partner and the more disagreements you have over time.
Yes, especially if you're, kicking the can, not addressing a conflict. Now you have all of these things underlying the relationship, these conflicts that were unresolved, that as you move forward is going to make it more difficult to communicate effectively and solve conflicts subsequently to that.
100%.
Now, you said something interesting. So the goal is not for each party to compromise. The goal is for them to come to some sort of mutually... So the goal is not to compromise. What did you say the goal was?
Okay, so compromise is a euphemism for both of us lose in a way that we can tolerate. That's a really bad idea.
Yeah.
You don't want to have an agreement where you both lose in a way that you're willing to put up with.
And this is fascinating because the heuristic and the rule of thumb is that relationships and conflicts are all about compromise. But that you're suggesting that compromise is not the best way to go because that's just how much are we each willing to concede and lose.
Exactly.
So what is the goal again? Can you explain?
Yes. So first of all, I didn't actually make this up. I learned this principle from FBI hostage negotiators. And there's a whole academic field of study called Human Behavioral Pattern Analysis, HBPA. And these are guys in the military, in the high Delta forces, I don't know what, who go into other countries and they deal with situations where they're trying to extract hostages, babies, families, when the ransom could be tens of millions of dollars. Otherwise, we're going to kill everybody in here, right? So these people are in the highest, most conflictual situations possible. And they learned two things about negotiation or about compromise or about conflict management. It's all kind of in the same family. Okay. The first thing that they learned is that compromises are not a good idea because they actually lead to resentment. Instead, you want to talk it out until both sides feel like they are winning, right? Now, sometimes the compromise, quote unquote, is I'll take the L on this one, but you let me win on another one, right? So sometimes that can be an effective concession. But a compromise is not, you know what, I'm going to let you have this one, you let me have the next one. The compromise is we're both not getting what we want on this one, so let's agree to disagree. And that never works. If you try to have a compromise with somebody who is holding your baby and your wife and they're asking for a $10 million ransom, it's not going to happen, right? They have to get some amount of money that they are happy with, that they're actually happy with. And I, as the negotiator, have to get the wife and baby back in my arms.
I suppose the question is it easier to negotiate with a hostage taker and win a conflict there, or with your wife?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if you could do one, you might be able to do the other.
Yeah, exactly. I know. There's a Canadian psychologist, Jordan Peterson, who has a famous line. He says, if your husband isn't the most annoying person in the world, how do you know he's your husband?
Ladies, annoying your wife is a love language.
Yes, exactly. For all the ladies out there, do you agree with Jordan Peterson?
Okay, so back to, we're not trying to compromise.
Yes, we're trying to find a mutually agreeable solution. And the other thing that these hostage negotiators have found is that the most effective communication strategy is not listening, it's not force, it's not threats, it's not increasing the amount of money that they're willing to offer. The most effective communication strategy is the hardest one, which is deference. The ability to be deferential. And this goes right back to what I was saying about putting your ego aside. If you are willing to defer to the other side, not to the extent that you give up your needs or your position, but to make them feel like what they are saying and feeling is valid, that will allow them to then defer a little bit, and you can both win. So compromise means we both lose, but I guess we're okay with it.
Validating the other person's feelings is monumental here.
Exactly. Deference, one person has to be the bigger person. One person has to defer first to the other one, right? So, I suggest whoever is listening to this, you be the deferential one. Deference is the key. Putting your ego aside, taking responsibility, apologizing first, right? The extent to which you can defer is the extent to which the other person will be incentivized to help you win. When human beings are given the opportunity to help or to do the right thing, they usually want to do it. Right? I'm not talking about really crazy sociopathic people, but most human beings, especially your husband or wife, when you put them in a position where they have the opportunity to help you win, and you've been gentle and deferential enough that they can see that you're trying to help them win, they will try to help you win back.
Yes, I understand your feelings. They're valid. I'm trying to help you win. And I agree. Barring any sort of sociopathic person, humans are pro-social, especially with those in their tribe, particularly if it's their spouse.
Right.
Agreed.
Now, there's a lot of incredible neuroscience on this topic of deference and helping each other win. There's are incredible scientific studies on brain scans that showed that when a couple is in conflict, okay, if they do these three things, the conflict gets solved infinitely faster. Couples who don't do the following three things, their conflict goes on and on and on and eventually leads to divorce. So they were trying to predict divorce rates. And obviously, divorce is the result of lots and lots of fights, lots and lots of disagreements, issues being swept under the rug, etc.
Invalidated feelings.
Right. And these neuroscientists, headed up by this guy, Stan Tatkin, who's a PhD, they conducted these two groups, one control and one regular. And what they found was that the couples who did these three things while fighting had significantly lower rates of divorce. And it's all because of the brain science. First thing is, while we're fighting, we're supposed to hold hands. Mike, give me your hand to demonstrate. Okay. Second thing is, while we're fighting, we're supposed to keep our voices low. Third thing is, while we're fighting, we are supposed to make eye contact. What happens when you're fighting? Usually, you're standing at opposite sides of the room or sitting on opposite sides of the couch. That distance signals to the brain that there's a threat, and I need to be in a position where I can take a running start to attack. Okay? When the voice is loud, when couples are fighting, usually their voices are elevated, right? Babies, what do they hate? They hate loud noises, and they hate the sound of their parents screaming at them. It scares them. That is still part of our neurochemistry. So when I hear that your voice is elevated, it tips off to me that there's a conflict and I need to be in defense mode. And in terms of eye contact, usually if we're in a fight, I'm diverting eye contact, I'm ignoring your ass, I'm pretending that you're not here. But if I look into your eyes, it actually releases all sorts of neurochemicals in the brain, and you probably know more about this than I do, because you're the brain doctor, that predisposes me to want to be kinder and more deferential.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the last podcast, but also what you're talking about are how to keep people at an emotional distance. You're keeping them at a physical distance. You're not looking them in the eyes. So this is also a way to be more emotionally close to someone during a conflict. Now, if someone would say to you, hey, Kevin, this conflict is bringing up a lot of anger. My body is geared up. It's hard to keep my voice low. How would you suggest that people handle their conflict when they're feeling angry in the moment? They're tense. They feel like having a loud voice. The idea of holding someone's hand, their partner's hand, is not appealing. So what happens when you're angry in the conflict? How do you deal with that?
So first of all, I'm giving out this advice because the people who get angry in a conflict, they shut down, they need space, they don't want to hold your hand, etc. I want them to hear this and realize that that's not an effective strategy.
But certainly, if you're angry in that moment, we can't invalidate that feeling. The anger is a state that your body's in. Now, you said several minutes ago, perhaps you take some time for yourself.
Yeah, that's
reflect, how am I contributing to this?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to say that we should try to prevent that situation from happening if possible, right? I want, if you tend to react that way, I want you to understand that that's not a good or effective reaction. But of course, it happens. I get angry when I'm fighting with my partner. You know, it's a normal human thing. What you need to do, what's not acceptable, is for you to manifest your anger in that moment. You have to have the self-control to say, you know what, I'm getting heated. Give me 10 minutes. Yeah. And then you go into another room, you go around the block, take a quick walk. I used to have a temper in my younger years, and when I would fight with my significant other, I would notice myself getting really heated. So I learned from an old therapist of mine that I go into the other room and I set a timer for 5 minutes. And I'm not allowed to send a text, an email, open my mouth, do anything for those 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And knowing that I had to sit there in my own like self-imposed timeout while I just breathe for that 5 minutes was super helpful.
The angry state is perhaps not the most useful for resolving a conflict, whether it's with your partner or anybody else.
100%.
So if you're feeling angry and heated, it's totally fine. If not, it will be beneficial to take 5 minutes and literally calm down and cool off.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the self-regulation piece. But I do want to say, you would be astounded at how helpful it can be, or how quickly your anger can dissipate if your partner lovingly, not condescendingly, but if your partner lovingly comes over to you and says, listen, I can tell this is getting heated. I can tell you're angry right now. Do you want to pause for 5 minutes? It's totally okay. So if you're really heated and your partner is not as heated, and your partner has the ability to come over to you and suggest a pause, not in a way that's like, you're really pissed off right now, so why don't you, go take a walk? Like, that's just going to piss you off. Exactly.
Tone, which never helps.
Exactly. But if you as the partner can say to the person who's really angry, hey, listen, I can tell you're heated right now. What do you need? Do you need a hug? Do you need 5 minutes in the other room? Just tell me what you need, and then let's pick this up.
Yeah. Excellent tips on conflict resolution. Are there any more of those 8 that you feel like is pertinent to share with the audience?
Yeah. I mean, 2 of them are 2 of the 8 conflict resolution tips are take personal responsibility and put your ego aside, which we already talked about.
Yeah.
The other 2 that I've shared so far are never say anything that you can't take back and no compromises, right? We need to keep talking until we find a mutually agreeable resolution. I guess I'll share one more, which is, I also shared don't dig up the past and use it as ammunition. And we can have a whole...
That's a big one.
Yeah, we can have a whole conversation about that.
Common trap people fall into.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I'm working with couples, I can't tell you, how often it is that the husband will bring something up and the wife is like, well, in 2005, you said that I looked fat in that dress, and then he's like, oh, really? Well, in 2007, you did X, Y, and Z. And it's like, hold on a second, guys. Let's stay focused on what's going on here. Exactly. I guess one more that I'll share that I think gets overlooked very often, and this isn't really something that people are educated on when they are engaging in the conflict, is your pain is my pain. My pain is your pain. We are one flesh. It's not, that's your problem to deal with, and this is my problem to deal with. That, I think, is a huge misconception. When we do that, for example, let's say that you don't like your mother-in-law and your mother-in-law is causing issues, and you say to your wife, not that you would, but hypothetically, you say to your wife, well, it's your mother-in-law who's causing these issues, right? This has nothing to do with me. As soon as you say that, you and your partner are now on different teams. You have isolated her and you've predisposed her to take her mother's side rather than taking your side. The most important thing is to remember that it's not me versus you. It's you and I versus the conflict.
Bingo. I love that. That is a great kind of rule for a relationship. It's not me versus my partner. It's me and my partner versus our problem.
Exactly. So every problem that arises, whether it's my pain or your pain, whether it's caused by my mother-in-law or your cousin, my money situation, or your friend's situation, right? Every single issue that arises is a common enemy of us both.
Yeah, and very, very important. Now, what I want to get to in like our next segment is, we led this podcast by discussing dating in the modern life, relationships today, the way the world is, dating apps, social media,
Singles.
so on and so forth. I'm getting a lot of questions, not just from my patients, but from the audience as far as like single people. Can we contrast what does dating life look like now? And, perhaps pros and cons, and what sort of problems arise as far as like the current dating landscape when compared to just human psychology, attachment, and a healthy relationship. And then we'll also get to the point that I brought before, is how do you put yourself in the best position to succeed? But what do you see now as far as the current dating world and just like human psychology and attachment style and relationships?
Okay, so we have a major epidemic right now, which is actually the very reason that I went into this line of work. I can say a little more about my kind of personal history at some point. But the epidemic that we are experiencing right now is that all millennials, which today would be people basically between the ages of 27 and 40, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe like 28 and 42, something like that.
Yeah.
All millennials and all the generations that came after millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, TikTok generation, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. We have the lowest marriage rates of any society in human history. And we are also having fewer babies than any society in human history ever. And yet, we are the most entrepreneurial, the most intelligent, the most in shape, the best looking. We have the most technology and the most opportunity at our fingertips. So in other words, something has happened that as society has advanced and all of the information has become available at our fingertips, our generation, particularly my generation, has taken a shift away from successful dating and relationships.
Is that a problem? Progressives will say, why should that be considered a problem that people are getting married less often? I suppose the question of, is it a problem that we're having less children might be more of an obvious answer, given we're human animals, we need to propagate. But is that a problem that we're moving in the direction of less marriage and having less children?
I don't know if it's a problem in terms of the census or the birth rate or data that those types of people study, but I can tell you that it is the number one problem in terms of people's mental health.
Which then kind of, the implication there is that not forming a secure, healthy attachment into romantic relationship and leading to marriage will then lead to problems with your mental health. Is that the implication there?
It's not an implication. It's an empirical fact.
Yeah.
And here, if you study the people who live the longest, the people who have the lowest risk of cancer, diabetes, hypertension, the people who have the healthiest and happiest lives, what's the number one predictor? Number one predictor is successful long-term romantic relationship.
Yeah, and it's important to note that the data backs up your claim, and I would agree with you, because there's a whole culture out there now that preaches you don't need to be in a relationship, you don't need to be married, you can reach your goals being
on your
alone and single and independent. So you would argue against that, and I think the data would be on your side.
100%. 100%. And listen, here's a little anecdote for you to just show you what I'm talking about, and then I'll try to back it up a little bit so you don't think I'm just making this up. The same person who is on my couch in my office, she had a one-night stand the night before. She says, I don't need a man. I just need to be okay on my own. She is pursuing her career. She's pursuing her friendships. She's talking about how relationships these days are an absolute headache. There are ways that I can get pregnant on my own. The same guy who is talking about how I want to focus on my career and money, women are a distraction. Why would I want to deal with that? I'm not interested in having kids or being married until I'm at least 40 or 45. Okay. These people are the same people who, if I catch them on a different day in my office, are crying their eyes out, literally crying their eyes out about how alone and misunderstood they feel. They're the same people who are self-medicating with unhealthy amounts of weed and alcohol and reckless sex and partying, right? So no matter how much a person tells you that I'm fine on my own, it flies in the face of everything we know to be true about evolutionary psychology and the way that human beings were born and bred to attach to one another.
Yeah.
So you alluded to this in your introduction, but if you asked me, what is the cause of this epidemic that people in our generation are having such a hard time finding and maintaining relationships, and that there's been this sea change towards independence and self-sufficiency?
Yeah.
The main cause, in a sentence, is that human beings have tried with progressive ideals to outsmart evolutionary biology and psychology. And it's not working.
No.
We think that we can determine the rules of how biology and chemistry and our brains and our bodies and our internal psychological functions work. We think that if we invent something that is smart enough, or if we write a best-selling book, or if we make a good enough soundbite, that's going to change the human fundamentals. And we insist that it is. We insist that now we're in a culture where we're so much more enlightened. Listen, I'm not saying that we should go back to 1950s America, because that had a whole other set of problems, right? Before today, the number one most psychiatrically medicated group of people were housewives in the 1950s. They were not happy people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's a good thing. Then, after that, the most medicated people were soldiers who came back from the Vietnam War in the late 60s. And now, today, the most psychiatrically medicated people are Americans between the ages of 28 and 45.
Yeah.
Our generation.
And this is one of the reasons that me and Kevin are colleagues, is that he has conviction in his beliefs. He understands that there are universal truths as far as human nature, and he will challenge his patients. I mean, there are some therapists out there that are just purely supportive, right? You don't need a relationship. You're totally right. You're working on being an independent person. Continue your path. It's okay that you engage in this sort of one-night stand.
Find your own path. Find your own journey.
Path. That purely supportive role. Now, that purely supportive role might support someone who is misguided. But I love working with psychotherapists who have conviction and understand that, listen, we are human animals. yeah, there's a lot of adaptation and socialization and the cultures change. But what remains is that we're human animals. We have human nature, and that there are universal human rules, I suppose, as far as the way we're wired
Exactly.
as tribal animals that pair bond, that apply. And you will challenge your patients, which is not always easy.
Right.
It's not always easy because the reality of their situation sometimes is difficult to accept, and how they have supported themselves into believing that, oh, I can just be, Mr. and Mrs. Independent. I don't need no sort of like marriage or family. It's oftentimes really difficult to challenge that.
It's very difficult to challenge
that. And that alone
that.
can bring up a ton of anxiety.
Totally. And I have to do this in a very, very careful way. I have a lot of clients who are women in their 30s who have not been able to find the right partner yet. And this is something that causes them great, great pain, especially as their bodies are starting to tell them that there's a desire for them to bring children into the world. And they're feeling that biological kind of internal operation.
Yeah.
And the issue is that many of these women have become extremely independent and self-sufficient to the point where they've become their own man, or they've become their own partner in life. And the issue is that on the one hand, I'm telling them that it doesn't work that way. You can't continue on that way because you're hardwired to find a mate, right? Human beings, as you said, are a tribe species. And all of the evidence, all of the clinical literature supports this. On the other hand, a lot of the time, people who've become super independent and self-sufficient, they did it because they didn't have a choice, right? If you've been trying to find a mate for marriage for 10 or 15 years and you haven't been able to find someone, you still got to pay your own bills. You still got to have your own friends. You still have to be financially, emotionally able to stand on your own 2 feet and to function. So it's a very delicate balance. And this is why, I would never, ever, ever, God forbid, blame somebody for not finding the right person and for creating this independence. But what I do try to do is help them understand that dependency is not a bad word, nor is it a choice. So rather than affirming their choice to become independent, what I try to do is slowly bring them back to their heart's desire and to the natural human inclination, which is to find a healthy partner and become reliant and dependent on them in a healthy way, and have that person become reliant and dependent on them in a healthy way.
Now, this, believe it or not, is somewhat of a controversial opinion these days, because suggesting to a woman in her 30s, like the case that you're giving, that perhaps she needs to guide her life in the direction of being, dependency, finding a secure, healthy relationship, these days is controversial because the cultural swing towards independence.
It's controversial if, excuse my language, you're stupid and you're not hearing what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are going to hear this, they're going to take a soundbite and they're going to say, oh, Kevin suggested that a woman has to be dependent on a man. That just means you've got cotton balls in your ears.
Yeah.
Okay. Nowhere am I saying that a woman can't have her own career, that she can't have her own finances, that she can't have her own friends, that she has to sit around and be a Stepford wife.
Of course.
In fact, I just argued moments ago why you shouldn't do that. But if you want to be happy and fulfilled and have sound mental health, there are many pillars that comprise sound mental health and happiness and fulfillment. But one of them, which is the most important one, is that you have to become comfortable depending and relying on a romantic partner in a stable and lasting relationship. And by the way, if you're a man, it makes no difference.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. The data agrees with you. Now, it also is important to note that, the people that are seeing you, the people that are coming in to see me, they're presenting with a complaint. Whether it's a clinical anxiety, a mood disorder, they might be depressed, they might be anxious. They are coming to us with a complaint. Hey, doc, I don't feel good. So this isn't necessarily some sort of unsolicited advice. Well, maybe it might be, because we're talking about just universal truths for human nature. But people are coming to us with a complaint. They don't feel good, which means oftentimes we're looking towards what sort of change needs to be made.
Right.
Yeah.
And usually the reason that people don't feel good is the byproduct of something going wrong in one of their relationships. Mm-hmm. So if you study every person who has ever had addiction, depression, criminal history, incarceration, gang affiliation, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, the list goes on. If you study any person who has had a series of problematic mental health issues, something went wrong at one of 3 points every single time. Either something was wrong with their primary attachment figures, their mother and father. That could be that their mother had borderline. It could be that the father was out of the picture. It could be that the parents were negligent because they were drug addicts. But the child, for whatever reason, did not get what they needed from the primary attachment figure.
The caretaker, usually the mother and father.
Sure. Second scenario that could have gone wrong is that in adolescence, something went awry with the kid's peers. When you're in 6th grade, 8th grade, 4th grade, your mother and father are no longer the most important attachment figures. Then it switches to your peers.
Yeah.
So either you were terribly harassed or bullied, or God forbid there was a sexual assault incident. Something happened at that stage of your life where your primary attachment figures, the people around you at school, or your cousins, your neighbors, something got messed up there. Or the third scenario is that something went wrong with your adult primary attachment figure, who is your romantic partner. You had a series of bad relationships, someone cheated on you, somebody lied to you, but every single person who would be a patient of yours, where you're diagnosing them with some clinical disorder and you're helping them get their life on track, every single one of them had an issue in a human relationship, either between the ages of 0 and 7, or between the ages of 7 and 18, or in their adult life when they started dating.
Absolutely. And that answers the question, hey, doc, I had a great childhood. I had great parents. Why is this happening to me? It's very, very important to realize that attachment trauma can happen during major developmental periods of one's life. And that is not just 0 to 7 with you and your parents. It can also happen subsequent to that with your peers at school, and subsequent to that in your adult relationships.
Yeah, I think that's a big misconception.
And humans are relational beings, so I completely agree with you. Humans are social animals, and relating to others is a fundamental piece of human nature and development.
Exactly.
So
humans are the best thing that can happen to each other, and also the worst thing that can happen to each other.
absolutely. And that we're not going to get into this now because I have a tendency to digress.
Okay.
But that relational piece of the work we do with the transference and the countertransference, and a lot of what me and Kevin do in our work is analyzing the way that the patient is relating to us. What feelings are they bringing to us? How are they relating to us? How are they making us feel towards them, the countertransference? And oftentimes, you will find that in our working relationship with me, the provider, and the patient, you recognize ways in which they're fucking up the relationship with you, keeping you at an emotional distance. You recognize making me feel some sort of negative way towards them, annoyed, angry, irritable. And that's the gold. You work on the relationship that they form in session, and then kind of ask, well, are these similar patterns that are occurring here happening in other relationships that you have in your life? And I bring that up specifically because I got a lot of questions about countertransference, transference. We're not going to dig into that now. You guys can leave questions in the comments whether or not you guys want to know more about that, transference, countertransference, and what I just described. But I don't want to digress too much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, one thing I'll just say in response to that very quickly is for anyone who's listening who's considering working with me or Dr. Mike or a different coach or a different psychiatrist or anything, one thing to keep in mind is that if you're hiring a good practitioner, part of our job, me and you, is to model for the client what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like.
Absolutely.
And for a lot of our clients, they have never actually had a single person in their life who could challenge them in a healthy way, who could support them in a compassionate way, who was consistent, reliable, available, dependable, and at the same time had boundaries that need to be respected, right? So obviously, you're not going to get into a relationship with your psychiatrist or your therapist or something, God forbid. But what you should take away from that relationship, if it's a good working relationship, is, Dr. Mike is showing me that there are healthy ways to communicate, work through what I feel, talk about my challenges, get support, express my needs, and have those needs met while also regulating my own behavior and my own emotions.
Absolutely. Being authentic, being vulnerable, being accepted. Now, what you just described has a lot to do with what is a secure attachment. Mm-hmm. Now, perhaps we can lead into what is a secure attachment. Well, first of all, what is an attachment? This word is being thrown around everywhere.
Okay.
What is a secure attachment? Why is it necessary as far as relating with others? Now, we don't have to get too detailed as far as every single attachment type, but what is an attachment? And then what is a secure attachment?
Okay, how much time do you have? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I'll try to do the 30,000 foot overview.
Please.
This is a very nuanced thing, but let's just do 80 years of relationship psychology in 3 minutes here.
Please.
Okay, so first of all, an attachment, the way that I would define it is the extent to which you are able to have a close and secure and healthy relationship with another person. Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically, when you are born, your parents give you a certain amount of attention, affection, love, validation, skin-to-skin contact, etc. And based on how available and present and nurturing your parents are or are not, you tend to develop one of 3, possibly 4 types of attachment styles. One of those attachment styles is an anxious attachment. The other is a secure, And the third is an avoidant attachment style. Now, there are other categories that can be discussed that are more nuanced, but for the purposes of this, we'll stick to these three. A secure attachment style is one in which you are able to give and receive love in a healthy way. You're able to manage conflict in a healthy way, and you have a deep desire for intimacy and closeness and love, but that desire doesn't consume you so painfully, nor are you afraid of it. Okay? You're pretty balanced in your ability to have stable and healthy relationships.
And you can trust the other person. You can depend that they will be there for you. You can depend that when you're not with them and you feel at a distance, that they will return.
Exactly.
Security.
Exactly. So the easiest way to explain this in childhood is if a mom takes her son, her young boy, like a 3-year-old boy, to mommy and me, and then she steps out of the room, right? Let's say she says to her son, I'm just going to step out of the room, but I'll be on the other side of the door watching you through the window. The child is going to respond in one of three ways, typically. The secure child will say, okay, mommy, I love you. I'll be here playing with the other kids. The anxious child is going to say, no, mommy, please don't leave. Please, please, please. And the anxious child is going to cling to the mom's leg. The avoidant child is going to be mad at the mom, throw a small tantrum, and then go isolate himself in the corner and not play with the other kids. So the way that we see this in adult attachment is, as you said, the secure adult can have a relationship, wants a relationship, knows how to choose healthy partners. And if the partner is not there, or if there's a conflict, they're able to regulate themselves pretty well. The anxiously attached person, of which I am one, requires a lot of attention, a lot of communication, a lot of closeness and intimacy. And if the partner is not there, or if there are conflicts, it's very hard for the anxiously attached person to self-regulate.
Yes.
The avoidantly attached person is one who has difficulty with intimacy and closeness. And every time they get close to having a meaningful relationship, they find some flaw because they are really trying to keep themselves alone. These are people who, quote unquote, prioritize their independence and have a lot of difficulty with vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Now, the question is, this is the attachment style thing is we could do a 3-hour.
And if you guys want to hear more on that, you can leave comments. We can do a whole podcast just on attachment styles. We won't get too much more into it.
For sure.
Yeah.
But the question is, we were discussing this offline, is can you change your attachment style? Or can it be changed?
Yeah. And can it also be changed for the worst, right? Like, can you have good attachments through, your youth, your childhood, school, and then something occurred during your adulthood that shifts you from either secure to anxious or avoidant?
100%.
So can you change your attachment style?
So the answer to both of those questions is yes. And I'm a living example. My whole life up until the age of, I'd say 25, I was very securely attached. I had good relationships with friends, family, romantic partners. I was in a 4-year relationship in college that was very healthy and normal and fulfilling. And then I had a series of relationships in my early mid-20s that were very, very painful and very toxic and problematic. And they completely warped me. Now, I'm sure some of the warping has roots in my childhood, right? I'm sure that there was an anxious gene that was dormant in me that got switched on by those strings of relationships. But all of a sudden, I found myself having to fight this uphill battle to go from being anxiously attached, severely anxiously attached, to over the years becoming more and more secure. And now, thank God, I consider myself pretty secure, anxious leaning, but overall I'm pretty secure. And there are two ways that you can change your attachment style. By the way, I also know people who are in the other boat, people who are avoidant, and over time, they become more and more secure. So with enough attention and effort, you absolutely can change it. But it requires two things. First thing it requires is self-awareness and willingness individually to become more secure. If you're an anxiously attached person and you think the way that I once did, you know what? I'm just going to find someone who never makes me anxious. I'm going to find someone who is as clingy as I am, right? Then you might find that person and they might not trigger your anxiety, but you didn't actually fix the problem. And one day there's going to be a fight, or they're going to be unavailable, or they're going to be on an airplane. They can't text you back for 14 hours. And one day that anxiety that has been dormant because you found this person is going to come back up to the surface.
You're dodging the problem. So step one is recognizing and accepting that there is a problem and having a will to address and improve the problem.
Yes. And then how you do that on an individual level, going from a certain attachment style to becoming more secure, which is the gold standard. You discuss that with your therapist. You educate yourself. Takes work.
Not easy, people. It's not easy, but it is possible.
100%.
Yeah. And being that we're relational human beings, clearly that is very, very worthwhile to explore and address. Yes.
Yes. Now, the second way that this happens, and this is a common misconception, is it happens in the context of a relationship with a person who is secure.
That is so important, that the second step actually happens in context of when you're already in a relationship with a secure person. So getting into a relationship perhaps is a requisite for this continued growth and improvement, rather than just getting it all fixed up before I'm ready to date, right?
100%. And we were talking about this earlier where we said, like, how fully self-actualized do you need to be in order to be in a relationship? Listen, I always say you got to be 50 or 60% there on your own. You have to be functional. You can't be a drug addict. You can't have such debilitating depression that you can't get out of bed, right?
Of course.
But your airplane doesn't have to be a decked out private jet with all of the fixins in order for you to be in a relationship. Your airplane just has to be safe enough to fly. And then everything else, the rest of the healing will occur in the context of the relationship.
And again, as crazy as it is to say that this is somewhat controversial,
yes,
where you suggest to a person that has some sort of depression or anxiety, again, not clinical, we're not talking about picking yourself up from the bottom and the ground, the ground floor there, is that sometimes getting into a healthy, secure, loving, romantic relationship is required for feeling your best.
Exactly. And this part, it is controversial because today we have such a push toward being okay on your own, right? You have to be okay on your own before you can be in a relationship.
Yes.
Now, that's a nice concept, but there are a few problems with it. And this relates to the attachment thing. First problem with that concept is that if everybody were okay on their own, Mike, that would be the end of humanity.
Bingo.
Because why, if you're so okay on your own, why would you choose all of the difficulty of getting into a relationship and having to work on yourself all the time and bring kids into the world and you got to spend so much money? You know what I'm saying? If you're truly just fine functional on your own, that means that the species is going to die out.
Absolutely. You are wired to propagate your genetic code. Now, there's a conversation to be had there as far as contributing to the propagation of your genetic code as far as like evolutionary psychology, meaning there's also utility. Just because you don't have children of your own, there can be utility and fitness associated with contributing to the propagation of like your nieces, your nephews, other people that have your genetic code. And it's actually an interesting topic with regards to like homosexuality and them contributing to the propagation of their genetic code through their nieces and nephews and other people in their family. Again, topic for another time.
Okay.
But what remains is that humans are designed to propagate their genetic code.
Right. And humans are designed to attach to one another.
Absolutely. That's a fact.
That's a fact.
That's a fact.
This is not up for debate.
This is not our opinion. It's a fact.
Yes. So what I was saying about the issue with being okay on your own before you get into a relationship, first of all, that means that our species is going to die out. Okay. The second issue is that it's not true. It's not authentic. As I've told you, everybody who sits on my couch and talks about how their independence is really important to them is also shedding tears about the fact that they feel so lonely and unseen and they don't have a partner in life. And the way that this relates back to the attachment thing is that every relationship that you're in does one of two things. It either opens up the wounds that you brought to it and pours salt in those wounds, or it opens up the wounds that you brought to it and it heals those wounds. You can heal your own wounds, let's say 50 or 60% by yourself. But so much of the healing occurs within the context of the relationship with that healthy, secure, loving person. And I believe that whether it's God or the universe or evolution or whatever, science, whatever you believe in, I believe that it was designed that way. I believe that we do not have the innate capability to heal ourselves from the ground up 100% because if we could do that, then we wouldn't need each other. And then we would stop procreating and then humanity would end. I believe that God, science, evolution, the cosmos, whatever the larger force is, has designed humans in such a way that we have to find each other and get into these long-term monogamous relationships in order to complete that cycle of healing. And what I find with a lot of my clients is that we will get to a point where we've been working together for a year and a half, 2 years, and they're actually doing really well on their own, right? They've got it down. But now we're playing this waiting game where it's like you and I can talk for the next several months about your attachment stuff and your traumas and your needs and your wounds. But really, from this point on, the rest of the work is going to be brought up once you're in a relationship. And that's because once you're in the relationship, it holds up a mirror to you and it re-triggers all of your stuff, right? So at first, when the client comes in, we're working on their triggers, we're working on their traumas, etc. And there's a lot that we can talk about on an individual level.
And you can work with memories, bring up prior conflict, bring up relationship
patterns,
but nothing can equate to actually being in the relationship with real current feelings and conflict and tension coming up in your current relationship.
Exactly. And this is why a lot of therapists and coaches and counselors, psychiatrists, etc., shy away from couples work. I have a weird affinity for working with couples. I really, really enjoy it. But a lot of people are just like, no, I don't want to deal with that.
Talk about raw data, right? Yeah. Right there, right in front of you.
Exactly. It's because nothing will trigger you like being in a relationship. So I can't tell you how many times I've had a client where we've worked together for a year or two, they're doing really well, they leave the nest, they're flying with their own wings, and then 3 or 6 months later, they'll come back and they'll be like, hey, I got to talk to you. Some shit has hit the fan. Okay, of course. My door's always open. Come on in. What's new? Well, I started dating this person, or well, since the last time I saw you, now I'm in a relationship, and boom, once you're in a relationship, whoosh, all of the stuff starts coming up.
Exactly.
Now, this is not a reason not to get into a relationship. We're spent this whole podcast talking about why you should be in a relationship, and now I'm, fear mongering, telling you that it's going to bring up.
Well, now, I mean, for the next segment, I want to kind of focus on the singles that are watching and what sort of practical advice we can give them, and also warnings for traps to not fall into in this modern dating environment.
Yeah, so you took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say that the reason that a lot of singles remain single is that on an intuitive level, they know what we're talking about here, which is that being in a relationship is gonna bring up their shit. Am I allowed to say shit?
Yeah.
Okay. And they don't want to sign up for that.
Not only that, it's accepting the reality that that might be the source of their problem as far as their mental health. The fact that they're not in a relationship is a very difficult reality to accept.
Why?
Because it's incredibly anxiety provoking, because what lies in front of them is difficult as far as getting a secure romantic relationship and not entirely in their control. So it's very anxiety provoking to accept that they might need a relationship in order to fully feel well and content.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking to the singles right now, right? Modern dating world, how to take that self-responsibility and maximize your chances of finding the right person for you and getting into a good relationship, and common red flags to be aware of in this dating world.
Okay, so to the first question, how to maximize your chances and set yourself up for success, there are three things that I would suggest. First one's going to be obvious, which is you need to talk to someone. You need to get a therapist or a coach or a counselor, somebody who helps you see things from a third-party perspective. There is a reason that you haven't found the right person yet. Again, that's not a pejorative, right? But you need to understand, is it your trauma? Is it your attachment style? Is it your fear? What is going on behind the scenes that you are not attracting that person into your life?
And this hits on your first point as far as humility. I don't know it all. There could be something wrong. Let me listen to somebody else's point of view. Perhaps I can learn something.
Exactly.
Humility.
Exactly. So the second thing that I would do after you've consulted someone is I would take out a piece of paper and write down 3 questions. I call it a want, willing, won't. You write down everything you want in your romantic partner. Then you write down everything you're willing to tolerate in your romantic partner. And then you write down everything you will not deal with, your deal breakers in a romantic partner. And the reason that this exercise is so important is you will see that the want category is 15 things long. The won't category is 15 things long. And then the willing category is like 2 or 3. And that's your indication that you may be setting yourself up to failure, because it means that you have too many requests and too many demands and too many things you're not willing to deal with. And you need to recalibrate your priorities a little bit to set yourself up for success.
Yes.
Does this make sense?
This is hugely important. In your prior videos, you use a word called maximizers.
Yes.
And this is a major problem here with social media, is that everybody wants Mr. and Mrs. Perfect. The want list is long. The do not want list is long. So, and I'm sure I'll ask you to talk about what you mean by maximizers, but in this world of social media and unlimited opportunities as far as like potential mates, Mr. Perfect is one swipe away. I think this point is hugely important.
Yes.
Because, well, I'll let you tell us about like maximizers and being too stringent in the criteria for who is going to be an appropriate mate for you.
100%. And if you do this exercise, your want, willing, and won't, and if you have somebody on your team who you can review this list with, you will be able to recognize if you're being too stringent, too picky, too fearful, or if your standards are too low. Because that can also sometimes happen where you're not attracting the right person because you keep going out with people who are way below your level.
Yeah.
But we live in a maximizing society. We live in a society where people want 10s across the board, and they want those 10s across the board to be delivered to them without me having to change myself, right? And that's just a losing proposition, right? So there's always this question like, well, am I settling if I don't get 10s across the board? And my view is there is a certain definition of settling. I think most people get it wrong. What is settling and what's not. But when people are trying to maximize, get the most that they possibly can for the least amount of effort, work, etc., it's like anything else in life. You know, if you go into a department store and you're like, I want to get the most expensive suit or the highest quality suit that I can find, but I want it for a sale price. I want it for 50% off, and I don't want to have to do that much. You're not setting yourself up for success. As a matter of fact, when you want too many things, especially if you're not delivering, you are pricing yourself out of the market.
Yes.
Right? You are making yourself or the other person unattainable.
Absolutely.
And that brings me to the third thing that I would say if you want to increase your chances is you need to focus on giving. You need to focus on what you bring to the table. So tip number 1 is get a therapist. Tip number 2 is write out your want, willing, and won't. Tip number 3 is switch your focus from what am I going to receive to what am I going to give. And this is a bit of a mind F-U-C-K. Most people think that when they put themselves in a position to give, they are vulnerable. The more I give, the more I can be taken advantage of. The more I give, the more vulnerable I am. Not so. As a matter of fact, when you go into your first dates thinking about how I can give to this person and how I can invest to this person, you actually are in the position of leverage. Because now, instead of thinking about what you can receive, which is not in your control, you are thinking, is this the type of person into whom I would like to invest? And then the power balance shifts back to you. Now you're thinking, do I want to give to this person? What would I give to this person? How much should I give to this person? As opposed to what is this person going to do for me? If you're thinking about what this person is going to do for you, most of the time you'll be disappointed. But if you're in a new dating scenario and you're analyzing how much you can give and what you can give to this person who's in front of you, now you're actually in a position of leverage where you get to decide. But it's about the giving, not the receiving.
Absolutely. Now, on your second point, as far as setting your standards to some sort of unattainable level, there's two big ways that I see social media and dating apps negatively contributing to this.
Sure.
First of all, people are on social media. All that they're seeing are people's highlights, and they get this inflated sense of how perfect life should be, how beautiful and perfect a woman should be, how successful a man should be. They get this inflated, out of touch with reality sense of what the bar should be, because everybody knows what you see on social media is not actually in touch with reality. And then just this inflated sense of greatness and value and accomplishment and success and beauty. So their bar is artificially set to this artificial level that's digitally manipulated and curated. So they end up setting their standard to this unattainable level.
Right.
And then they go on their dating apps, which again, curated, manipulated with so many different options that they really fall into this trap of having their expectations set based on what they see on social media rather than reality, and feeling like, oh my goodness, Mr. Perfect is just one swipe away and I have 1,000 guys to choose from. So quickly and easily will they have 1 date, 2 date, 3 dates, find some sort of discrepancy with this human, real individual sitting in front of me versus these artificial high standards that I've set that have been influenced by social media. And they will then just say, well, let me just swipe on the next guy or woman and find Mr. and Mrs. Perfect.
Let me ask you a question. Do you like In-N-Out?
Love it.
Okay. When you leave In-N-Out, do you feel satisfied with your choice of going there?
After I finish consuming the meal, I might be less satisfied when I feel that sort of the feel you get when binging off In-N-Out.
Okay, let's say you're not binging it to the point where you're so full, right? But after you have In-N-Out, are you happy that you went to get a burger from In-N-Out?
Yes.
Okay. Where would you rather go, In-N-Out or the Cheesecake Factory?
In-N-Out.
Okay. But tourists would not rather go to In-N-Out. Tourists would rather go to the Cheesecake Factory. Mm-hmm. Because the Cheesecake Factory, or I could say tourists would not rather go to In-N-Out, they'd rather go to Disneyland. Mm-hmm. Because Disneyland and the Cheesecake Factory are the land of endless options. Mm-hmm. Okay? In-N-Out has 2 things on their menu, actually 3. Burgers, fries, shake. That's it. Mm-hmm. In a few different combinations, right? Now, tourists, people who are new to Los Angeles, for example, they want to go to the Cheesecake Factory and they want to go to Disneyland because these are places where the options are limitless. Mm-hmm. Okay? What happens is that they usually leave the Cheesecake Factory or leave Disneyland thinking about all of the items on the menu that they didn't order or all of the rides that the lines were too long to stand in. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly how dating apps work. Mm-hmm. Dating apps are excellent at getting you dates, but they are very, very poor at making you satisfied with the dates that you got. Mm-hmm. So dating apps lure people in with this promise of endless opportunity. But what ends up happening because of something called the paradox of choice is that whoever you go out with, you're very dissatisfied with most of the time, and then you go back to the dating app to try to find more choices that you are then dissatisfied with, and it goes in this endless cycle. Mm-hmm. So the paradox of choice explains why people are happier eating at In-N-Out than they are eating at the Cheesecake Factory. The more choices that are available to you in a given conundrum, the less satisfied you will be with whichever choice you make because there was so much comparison and because you have buyer's remorse thinking about what you could have had instead. Mm-hmm. Now, I do want to shout out some people have found their long-term husbands and wives on dating apps, and if it has worked for you, then great. There are some benefits to it. I'm not like a shut your apps off forever, proponent. I understand. But if we're talking about the downside, the main downside is that it has made people 2 things. It has made them, 1, unsatisfied with their choice. That's because of what you said. The bar has artificially been set too high. That's also because of Instagram. The other thing that it has made people is non-committal. Back in the day, when our parents were getting introduced to each other through their families or their local community, it was kind of like, look, here are 4 or 5 options like that are eligible. Our families know each other. We can vouch for them. Like choose and then make a good life with them, right? Today, we live in the land of endless options, which means you don't have to commit because you can keep searching. But then we get caught in this catch-22 where no one wants to keep searching. The fact that they have to keep searching drives them crazy. So we're in this really intractable problem where people are going to the pain seeking comfort. They're going to the problem seeking a solution. And they're stuck on this hamster wheel of being unsatisfied and non-committal and simultaneously wishing they could get out of that cycle.
So how do you get off this hamster wheel? Me and Kevin, we both live in Los Angeles, certainly a community that relies heavily on social media and dating apps. Now, if you find yourself in this hamster wheel, in this cycle, I've got 10 matches, I go out with this person, not good enough, let me turn to the other, Miss Perfect is one swipe away. How do you get out of this hamster wheel? How do you not let this negatively contribute to you finding a mate?
So first of all, do the 3 things that I mentioned before. Get a therapist, write out your want, willing, and won't, and focus on giving and investing. In addition to that, if dating apps are working for you and they make you feel empowered, then more power to you.
And it's not all bad. We don't
Right.
need to purely vilify dating apps.
Exactly.
There's a lot of benefit from it. Yes.
Yes. If they are working for you, then more power to you. However, if they make you feel that you are stuck in that cycle, if I describe that cycle and you're like, oh my God, wow, like thank God someone gets it, then I think you should delete them. And I think you should focus on meeting people in person.
Yeah.
Same thing with Instagram. I swear to God, the only reason that I have Instagram is that it's good for my business. If I didn't have, if I didn't live in this digital age where the only way to get my message out is via social media, I would not use it because for my mental health, it's really poor.
Yeah.
One thing that is good about Instagram is we got a bunch of audience questions submitted through our little Ask Me Anything.
Absolutely. And we're going to get to the audience questions. Now, before we get to the audience questions, anything else you want to add towards advice to the singles that are watching, wanting to take self-responsibility and fully maximize their potential? You went over your 3 points. Anything else you want to add before we get to audience questions?
Yeah. The how doesn't matter.
What does that mean? And by the way, I have a question for you before we get to the questions as well. The how doesn't matter. What does that mean?
You don't have to know when, where, or how you're going to meet your person. That is not up to you. That's not your job. You just have to have certainty that if you're focused on giving and if you are being the best version of yourself, it will happen. Everybody gets caught up in the specifics. Should I go to this event? Should I get set up by my uncle? Should I be on this dating app? Should I delete this dating app? What do you think about this guy? I really am sick and I don't feel like going out to this networking thing, but I'm worried that I'm going to meet my person. None of that stuff matters. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is not when am I going to meet my soulmate? Where am I going to meet my soulmate? How am I going to meet my soulmate? The only thing that matters is, am I preparing myself to be a soulmate? Right? So a lot of people want to be married. Not very many people want to be a wife. A lot of men want kids. Not many men want to be a father, right? Those are 2 completely different ball games. So it's really an internal job rather than an external search.
One thing I wanted to pick you up on, how does one know if they're settling? What is your definition of settling?
Okay. So settling occurs when you are entering or staying in a relationship that you would strongly advise your daughter or son not to. If your son or daughter came to you and they said, listen, I'm dating this person, they have these qualities, they also have these downsides, you know, here are some of my concerns, but they make me really happy or whatever. And you as their parent would likely say to them, look, these things sound workable. These things are going to be hard. These things are good qualities. I think that you should go for it. And I think that you should give it a chance. Then even if it's not everything you imagined, then you are not settling. Now, if you're the parent who thinks no one's going to be good enough for my kid, that like a lot of these Persian parents, that's a different story, right? But generally speaking, if your son or daughter came to you and they said, listen, I'm in this relationship, the guy smokes weed all day long and he has a really horrible temper and he never goes to the gym and I'm not even actually sure what he does for work, and you're staying in that relationship because you love this person, that's a settle.
That begs the question, what sort of change in a person is reasonable to expect? And what sorts of things that you notice in the person you're dating can you not have hope that you can change for the better?
So, first of all, you can't have hope that the person's going to change for the better if they are a person who says, I'm not going to change, or if they don't want to change, right? Okay. So one of the biggest red flags to avoid when you're dating someone is when you meet them and they say, look, this is who I am, take me or leave me. If somebody tells you that, you should shake their hands and run as far in the other direction as possible, okay? Because the one constant in a successful relationship is that you change yourself and they change themselves for the benefit of the relationship.
And that's a very, very important point that Kevin just made.
Also a controversial take.
And also controversial is that people have to change. You are not just single Mr. Independent. You are now going to be a husband. You're going to be a father. You're going to be expected to mature and change.
Right.
So some people will argue against that. Like, I don't have to change. I don't need to change to get into a relationship or to stay in a relationship. Yeah, but I think change is healthy and part of maturing.
100%. People say all the time, why should I have to change myself for this person? And the answer is because if you want to have a healthy relationship, you're going to have to change yourself for anybody that you're with.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Now, you asked me, what is reasonable expectation of change and what's not?
Yes.
Okay. So what's not a reasonable expectation of change is that they change core fundamentals within themselves. For example, if somebody's a shy person or an introverted person, if somebody is a very meticulous or organized person, if somebody really values their Judaism or really values their family, right? Things that are core to who the person is that have always existed from the time that they were young.
Values, temperament.
Exactly. Values, temperament, certain ways of seeing the world that they want to pass on to their children.
What the quality of the relationship is with their family.
Exactly. Those are not things that are reasonable for you to change because those things are woven into your partner's DNA.
What is reasonable to expect as far as change?
Anything that's a behavior. And most things, 95% of things in a relationship are a behavior. What we were just talking about, temperament, values, etc., those are like 5 or 10%. Everything else is a habit. So if a person has a temper, if a person has an attitude problem, if a person has certain friends that are very toxic, if a person has poor communication, if a person has a default way of reacting in a certain situation, all of those things are changeable. And if changing them is going to serve the relationship, then it is very fair that you have the expectation that the other person do that work, right? You also have to be willing to change yourself. And you have to be willing to be called out in a loving way on what those things are.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that people can change. Like I was saying before, when someone is just an independent individual that's single and in the dating world and only responsible for themselves, they are able and most will change when they enter a different dynamic and different station in life. They're a husband, they have children. So change is absolutely possible, but recognizing things are kind of more so set in stone with regards to like temperament, for instance, are much, much more difficult to change.
Of course.
Yeah.
And look, if right out of the gate, you don't like that someone's super close with their family, you don't like that they don't have a relationship with their family, you don't like that they're really extroverted, you don't like that they think a certain way and they always have, then it's going to be a losing battle for you to try to change that person. But I believe most things are behaviors and habits, and they can be changed.
People can learn, people's priorities can shift. But I agree with you as far as like those core values, temperament, personality, the way their brain's firing. There's some stuff that's just hardwired. I agree with you. It's unlikely that they can or even should change.
Right.
Now, let's get to audience questions.
Okay.
First audience question.
Let's do it. This is always the most interesting part.
Are there any significant differences in the advice you give to men versus women as far as how they should pursue looking for a mate?
As far as how they should pursue looking for a mate,
seeking and finding and fostering a relationship, but the seeking part. Yeah. Finding a mate. Are there any big differences in how you advise a male versus how you advise a female?
No. When it comes to seeking and finding that stable relationship, I think that everything that we've talked about so far is applicable in the same way to men and women. But when it comes to how they behave in the relationship, that's a whole other ballgame. Okay? So that's when things really get different.
Yeah.
One of the number one contributors to issues in the relationship is that men do not understand how women operate and vice versa. So men are speaking a language that they understand and women are acting in a way that they understand, right? But they haven't learned how to understand the other person's language. So a lot of the work that I'm doing with men is these are the things that are going to make you attractive to your female spouse.
What makes a male attractive to females?
I can't say I'm going to get in too much trouble. I'm going to get canceled unless I do like a million disclaimers here. But look, if we're talking about traditional masculinity and what is attractive to most women, not all, I think there are a few things. First of all, the first one is the ability to signal future resource acquisition. And what that means is the guy doesn't have to be rich right now, but he needs to display a level of ambition and drive such that the woman believes that in the future he'll be able to acquire resources and that he will be a good protector and provider.
Yeah, which is also somewhat controversial, the idea that women are looking for men that can be providers.
Yes.
Which includes finances.
It includes finances. It's not only limited to finances.
Of course.
And when I say women, what I'm talking about is 97% of the women who come into my private practice. Maybe that is a small, swath of the population. There may be millions of women out there who completely disagree with what I'm saying, and that's fine. But what I see on a day-to-day level is that this is what most of the women who cross paths with me are looking for. The first thing is the ability to signal future resource acquisition.
Absolutely. And, I don't think that, there's evidence behind that. I don't think that's just your opinion. I would say that's part of human nature.
Yes. And, that goes back to the evolution and the biology that women have much more to protect, and they are very often thinking about their future and their children and whether that's going to be protected. So, thousands of years ago, it was how physically fit is the man. Today, it's how sharp are you? How intelligent are you? How driven are you? How ambitious are you? Do you follow your words with your actions, etc.? So
Integrity.
Yeah. So I think that's a big one. I think another big one that often gets overlooked by a lot of men, this is actually geared more toward the men, is most women are looking for a feeling of safety with a man, emotional safety. And that means that they are with a man who has the ability to regulate his emotions and not make impulsive, reactive decisions. Okay?
Fascinating.
So, they say that the most important thing to a man is respect and appreciation, and the most important thing to a woman is love. I think that's 50% right. The most important thing to most men is respect and appreciation. But the most important thing to most women is safety. Physical and emotional safety, right? And these traits tend to go together. If you're a guy who is signaling that you can provide and protect a family, you are probably also a guy who knows how to regulate his emotions, doesn't have a temper, doesn't have a drug problem, isn't going to fly off the handle, doesn't display abusive tendencies, right? So I think that, if you've got those two things down and you take somewhat good care of yourself, you're going to be fairly attractive to most women.
The woman feels secure. Not just secure in her ability to be provided for and have her children provided for, but also emotionally secure.
Right.
And that goes towards like a secure attachment as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the flip side, what do men tend to find, most men, what do they tend to find attractive in women? This is also just, take this with a grain of salt because you may have a different experience or whatever. But I think that there are a few things that men look for. The first one is particularly what they lack, which is gentleness, softness, femininity. Most men are hotheads. Most men are impulsive. Most men don't have the ability to pause and take a breath and just slow everything down. This is why the vast majority of people who are incarcerated are men. Okay? A lot of women have a nurturing, intuitive, emotionally gentle ability to cool down a situation. And I think the most attractive women to men are the ones who exude that aura of calmness and soft.
Yeah, which is also controversial today to even define what femininity is.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is controversial, but one of the things that I see is, you've probably seen this on Instagram, men are always talking about how all day long I have to be out there fighting the demons and the dragons and, being at war in the workplace. When I come home, what I want is peace. You've heard this before?
Of course.
Okay. What are they describing when they say peace? What they're describing is, I want someone who helps me soften. I want someone who brings a sense of calm and ease to my life. And that is a superpower that I think a lot of women have if they tap into it. Now, today, the pendulum has swung to the other direction, where we've encouraged men to be less and less in touch with their masculinity and cultivate those masculine traits less and less. And as a result, we have a lot of shitty men out there.
Yeah.
And we've encouraged women to be less and less in touch with their own femininity, their nurturing side, their communicative side, their emotional side, their soft side, right? And we've encouraged them to be more and more like men. Because there's this idea that, the patriarchy is taking over, so everyone should partake in the patriarchy, right? Including women. Whereas the truth is, if we want to make men happier and more successful creatures, and we want to make women happier and more successful creatures, then we need to honor their strengths and bring them together to help them iron out their weaknesses, right? As opposed to disavowing our strengths and weaknesses and just pretending that we're something we're not.
So how do you suggest a man that's not sexually satisfied in his romantic relationship broach that topic with his partner?
How to talk to her about it?
Yeah, how to talk to her about it. Well, first of all, I know that there's no one strict definition as to how often a couple should be having sex. But when a man is feeling sexually unsatisfied in the relationship, like this audience member is asking about, how best should they assert that with their partner? Do you have some general advice?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that man has to do some soul searching, hopefully with the help of a counselor, a sounding board, and understand why they're not getting their needs met. Is it because they are not attracted to their partner and they don't want to approach their partner as much as they used to? Is it because their partner is not as attracted to them? One of them is lacking respect for the other. If he says to his wife, hey, we never have sex anymore, and she says, oh yeah, I'm just really tired or whatever, and he can kind of tell that she's just playing it off. I think the first thing is you want to get as clear as possible on what your hypothesis is for why this might be happening. And then, this is a very delicate topic, but you want to go and approach your partner, and as gently and politely as possible, you want to say, listen, I feel that I'm not getting one of my needs met. And before I make any accusations of you as to why that is, I want to know if you can recognize that this is true, because this is how I'm feeling. Do you think that this is true? And if they say, no, I think we have plenty of sex, right? Then you have to explain why it's not satisfactory to you. And then you can talk about why that is. And if they say, yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up because I've noticed that too, then you're also opening up the floor to discuss why that is.
Yeah.
But usually if you can understand the reason why there is that deficiency, then you can both come up with something that's going to be mutually agreeable. Now, it may be because there's a really deep underlying reason that your wife has become estranged to you, or vice versa. And then you might have to go to couples counseling or whatever. But instead of taking it as an insult or something that's emasculating or feeling hurt or abandoned, first try to be curious and try to talk to the other person about it.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to ask this last question.
Sure.
You're a psychotherapist, but you've also are a coach. So my question is, how do those two things differ? What about being a coach provides more accountability, and why is accountability helpful for the person? So tell us about being a coach versus a therapist. Why is having a coach so helpful? And then tell the audience how they can get in touch with you, and any sort of like a website or any way they can communicate with you.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So the best way that I can describe it is that therapy tends to be more about the past and more about self-awareness, discussing things you've been through, past traumas, and understanding how those events have shaped you.
Mm-hmm.
And, then of course, thinking about ways in which you can avoid certain maladaptive patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching, on the other hand, tends to be more about this is where you are today and you have a problem that you would like to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dig into our toolbox and think about how we can solve these problems through your own personal accountability.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to have a background in both of those approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And what I try to do, my work is certainly more coaching focused because I just take a much more active role with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like to get in there and get my hands dirty.
Mm-hmm.
I let my clients call me at 11 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
I let them text me between the sessions whenever they want.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also important to understand the psychological underpinnings of what's going on in the person's mind and heart and body.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very rare that it's like someone comes to you with a problem. Okay, if you do these 3 things, here's the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes into it that I have to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But generally my approach to mental health is unsurprisingly controversial, like some of the other stuff we talked about today. My approach is that if you're overweight and you hire a personal trainer and you go work out with that trainer once a week for an hour or 50 minutes, you're going to make progress, but it's going to be very, very slow.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you hire a personal trainer and you work out with him once a week, the other 6 days a week, he puts you on a workout program. He puts you on a nutrition program. There are certain supplements that you have to do. You have to take. There are certain practices that you have to do in the morning and the evening. You are creating a body transformation. And if we apply that same model to mental health, if you are doing something to work on your mental health as prescribed by the person you have hired, the person you're trusting to help you, then you are creating a character transformation, a personality transformation, right? So you as a psychiatrist know it's not enough to give someone a bottle of pills and say, take 1 pill a day, you'll be okay, right? That 1 pill a day is setting themselves up. It's giving them the ability to do everything else that they need to do to get their mental health in order. So it's not just hiring the personal trainer and then you're done. That personal trainer is setting you up to do all of the additional follow through. But if you do it, then you're going to be in shape much faster and your results are going to last a lot longer.
So what does it look like? They hire you as a coach. They meet with you how often? How do you keep them accountable? Like, what does it look like?
So my clients, they hire me and we meet in person. Unless they're out of town, then we'll meet on Zoom. But the ones who are here will come to my office in Beverly Hills either once or twice a week. At the end of every session, I send them notes on what we talked about that was really salient in the session that I want them to think about. I send them homework that I want them to work on throughout the week. And then we will have multiple touch points throughout the week, every day, every other day, every 3 days, depending on the situation that the person is in, to make sure that they're making some form of progress every week.
And that accountability to another person is huge.
Yes.
Again, we're tribal animals. We are not meant to just go at life alone. So having that accountability to somebody else is absolutely crucial in maintaining motivation, drive. I love it.
Thank you. Now, I do have some clients who they just come in once a week. We just talk for that 1 hour.
Traditional psychotherapy.
Yeah, traditional, because that's what they need.
Yes.
You know, so I'm not going to sign somebody up for something that they don't need.
Yes.
But when people are in situations where they've got 5, 10, 8, 15 years of stuff that hasn't been addressed and now it's all coming to a head, I like to take a much more comprehensive approach.
And if somebody wants to hire you for your services or consult with you, how do they get a hold of you?
Thank you. My Instagram is just my name, Kevin Nahai.
Nahai.
Yes. And my website is kevinnahai.com.
Yes. And you also do a lot of speaking engagements. You're an author, you're a speaker. So if somebody wanted to hire you for some sort of speaking engagement, same website, I imagine.
Yeah. My email and phone number are on there. And shameless plug, in March, I will be launching my own podcast. It's called Nobody Listens to Kevin. And everybody can expect for Dr. Mike to be a guest on the podcast very soon. I've been aggregating some of the content and I'll be launching that. And then pretty soon we'll be seeing you on my show.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike.
I'll see you soon on your podcast. All right.
Appreciate you.